Bianca Belair, Jade Cargill, and Naomi, collectively known to the WWE Universe as the Big Three. Just months ago, they were walking into WrestleMania 40 and defeating Damage Control, creating a new step in the ladder that is the women's division. Since then, Tag Team Championship Gold has found its way to these ladies not once, but twice, as Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill would team together to win the tag team titles. However, tragedy would strike in November, as Jade Cargill would mysteriously be attacked during a match that involved Bianca Belair and would be thrown through the window of a car, injuring her for several months. As Nick Aldis told Bianca that she would ultimately give up her championship title if she could not find a partner, it was Big Three colleague Naomi willing to step up to defend the tag team run, as well as also fight for her sister Jade. For another 100+ days, Naomi and Bianca Belair, known as Team Glowest, would continue to defend and represent the Women's Tag Team Championship with prestige and honor, while the mystery would continue as to Jade's attacker. However, at Elimination Chamber, Jade Cargill would unexpectedly return, and to everyone's shock, instead of going after the primary suspects, she would turn and attack now former best friend, Naomi. 6 days later, Naomi would confess tearfully that she was the attacker to Jade Cargill back in November, to a very disheartened and broken-hearted Bianca Belair, resulting in Jade Cargill arriving at SmackDown to lay the final punch and set up their rivalry match for WrestleMania. Despite Naomi's actions, though, while heinous, we ask and pose this question today. Was Naomi justified? Ultimately, you look at all of these actions, and while Naomi may have not been correct in doing so and ultimately will have to face down Jade Cargill likely at WrestleMania, I'll present in this video why I believe that yes, Naomi was indeed justified for attacking Jade Cargill, but not for the reasons you may think. Welcome everyone to the premiere episode of The Contrarian. Welcome, OTRA Universe, to the premiere episode of The Contrarian, a subsidiary show of On the Ring Apron and Mania Club, proud members of Champions of Hope Foundation. I'm Steve with On the Ring Apron, and I present this show to you as an opportunity to discuss and delve deeper into WWE's best storylines and find out why everything that you see may not be occurring for the reasons that you think. Welcome everyone to our premiere episode of The Contrarian. This is an opportunity that I've been asking for quite some time, and luckily the powers that be are going to let me have the wheel to discuss some of WWE's best storylines and give you an opportunity to be able to weigh in on sides of the coin that perhaps aren't as popular, but also bring out different sides of our WWE universe and their characters. Before we get started, because I have the degree and I like to show it off whenever possible, I do present the definition of a contrarian, a person who opposes or rejects popular opinion or opposes against the current practices. Essentially, WWE presents different storylines, and the expectation is that you're supposed to choose, a majority of the time, one side to root for while rooting against. This show is going to allow you to be able to dive deeper into why people do moves that may not necessarily be the greatest, but allow for WWE and its characters to evolve beyond just that of a simple storyline and realize that things that have happened previously may play roles in why actions are made. Nothing could be proven further than the story we're going to talk about today with Naomi's attack on Jade Cargill and why movements from her career are the reason for the attack on Jade. We've all watched together as the big three have accomplished wonderful things in the year of 2024 and early part of 2025. But now that Bianca Belair has her sights set on the Women's World Championship at WrestleMania, Naomi now faces Jade Cargill seemingly alone and without much help from her locker room. But is everything exactly as it is shown? And ultimately, I pose the question, was Naomi justified in her attack of Jade Cargill? I'm going to play the role of yes, she was. Give me a moment here to explain why, and then see what you think, and see if your view on Naomi changes as we go through her career. Naomi originally began in Florida Championship Wrestling as a sweet girl named Naomi Knight. She proudly ended up winning the first ever FCW Women's Divas Championship and proudly supported FCW as its champion for several weeks. Over the course of her career while joining the main roster, we have seen many different iterations of Naomi's character, but ultimately she has shown off that she is always going to provide smiles and happiness for those within the WWE Universe, whether battling for championships or just competing in regular matches. Naomi's career with WWE and the main roster begins with her debut alongside Ariane Andrew, aka Cameron, as members of the Funkadactyls. This beautiful ebony duo would constantly come out along with their partner, Brodus Clay, and provide happiness and joy to the song Somebody Call My Mama, always leading to fans and children standing up out of their seats to erupt in happiness. However, it wouldn't be long before Naomi would face her first early betrayal, as Brodus Clay would choose to go off on his own, leaving the Funkadactyls to fend for themselves. Nothing would fit that model more than right before WrestleMania 29, when the Funkadactyls were set to face the Bella Twins at WrestleMania 29 in New York City. However, as was popularly documented on Total Divas, just minutes before the match was scheduled to begin, it would ultimately be scrapped, so that way the main event between John Cena and The Rock could have a little more airtime, leaving the four of them to have to wait until the next night on Monday Night Raw to have their quote WrestleMania moment. And even then, Naomi really didn't get her moment, as the match would end up becoming part of an 8-person intergender tag match. While victorious, it wasn't the same moment that Naomi had expected in her first ever WrestleMania. With the popular rise of Total Divas on TV, you would start seeing the cracks between the Funkadactyls, as Cameron would take that opportunity to create herself a new persona and try to rise her way up through the Divas division. This would inevitably lead to conflict between the two best friends, and eventually Cameron turning on Naomi. While Naomi would ultimately get the last laugh on Cameron, this would be the end of the Funkadactyl run, meaning that in her first year and a half, Naomi had already been betrayed 3 separate times and now stood alone in the women's division. Her time alone, though, wouldn't be long, as the Divas Revolution would begin and the call-ups of Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and the boss, Sasha Banks, would lead Naomi into her next story. To be paired up with both Tamina and Sasha, Team Bad was set to be the bad girls that were going to move the Divas division into its next generation of superstars. But let's call a spade a spade. Anyone that watched during that era knows exactly what Team Bad was created for. And that was for Sasha Banks, to make her the most popular star out there, and it didn't take Banks long to realize that her own persona was going to be higher than anything related to Team Bad as a team. So while Sasha set her sights on the championship match for the new women's championship against Charlotte and Becky at WrestleMania, Naomi would ultimately be pushed down into a 10-person tag match where, while yes, she would captain the team of Team Bad and Blonde, it would be against the team of Total Divas that ultimately wanted nothing further to do with her. Naomi would be fed to the Total Divas one by one and inevitably would tap out to Brie Bella in her final full-time match on the WWE roster, creating yet another WrestleMania moment lost that she had worked so hard to attain. Shortly after, her best friend Tamina would turn on her as well, leading to yet another shakeup in Naomi's career, spiraling her back to the bottom of the women's division and forcing her to start over all over again. Not all of it was bad, though, as Naomi would redefine herself with her new glow aesthetic and would earn herself a championship match just before WrestleMania 33 in her hometown of Orlando as she battled for the SmackDown Women's Championship against Alexa Bliss. And through sheer will and determination, she would defeat Alexa Bliss and win her first world championship as she headed towards Orlando and her hometown as the reigning defending SmackDown Women's Champion. However, tragedy would not be far behind, as 8 days later she would be forced to relinquish the SmackDown Women's Championship to then GM Daniel Bryan due to an injury she sustained in the match. And just to add insult to injury, she would stand in the back as she would watch Alexa Bliss win back the championship that she had worked her entire career to have just minutes later. Rehab that was supposed to take months, Naomi fought for 6 weeks. And on the last SmackDown before WrestleMania, she was able to successfully return to insert her name into the six-pack challenge for the SmackDown Women's Championship. And through sheer will and grit, and with the hometown of Orlando following her, she would force Alexa Bliss to tap out to FTG to ultimately win back the SmackDown Women's Championship and creating a new glow revolution in the WWE Universe in front of her home crowd. And in my humble opinion, WWE Shop missed out on a great opportunity here, as she would introduce a new version of the WWE SmackDown Women's Championship, unofficially known as the Glow Belt. I'm sorry, they should have sold these. What do you think? They definitely should have sold these. Her title run, though, would not be everything she dreamed of, as instead of getting handed matches against such top competitors at the time as Tamina, Sasha Banks, Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, her first title defense would be against Lana, who had never had a singles match in her career up to that point on television. Even though Naomi clearly had a significant experience advantage as well as advantages in both speed and in strength, she would be forced to fall to that of a weakened champion, as her job was to make Lana look as strong as possible. While she did successfully defend the championship on 3 separate occasions against Lana, it didn't do well for Naomi's run as champion, as it made her look weak in the eyes of the WWE Universe. All would seem to be on the upswing as it headed towards SummerSlam, as Naomi would defend against longtime friend and veteran Natalya for the SmackDown Women's Championship. Natalya had always considered Naomi to be a friend, and was willing to give her that great match at SummerSlam to really solidify her reign. But what ended up happening instead, Natalya would turn heel, turning her back on the WWE Universe and her friend, and capturing the SmackDown Women's Championship, ending Naomi's run at just over 4 months. In just the few short years that Naomi had been on the main roster, she would watch as yet another friend would turn her back on her, this time for the title of glory and champion. And Naomi, for the 9th time, would watch as she would have to start over from the beginning. Once again, as she headed into next year's WrestleMania, however, Naomi would seem like she would be heading back on top, albeit in the pre-show, as she would win the inaugural WrestleMania Women's Battle Royal in front of a sold-out Superdome in New Orleans. This, however, would result in her 10th different betrayal or fallback, because anyone who sees the lineage of that match knows that there would only be 2 other winners before the match was ultimately dropped off, making the win almost seem fruitless. Naomi would be sentenced to the mid to low card of the women's division, finding herself in multiple storylines that would not even having her sniff championship gold, including one rather cringe-worthy storyline involving former Tough Enough competitor Mandy Rose competing for the heart of her husband Jimmy Uso. How would this end up going over for Naomi? To the stunned shock of no one, despite having more experience and more speed, Mandy Rose would go over Naomi, leading to yet another push to the bottom. And almost seemingly by just happenstance, she would end up becoming the captain of the SmackDown Survivor Series team later that year. And how would she be rewarded for her efforts? She would ultimately be the first person eliminated, ironically by former Team Bad colleague Tamina. To this point, Naomi's career seemed like it was on the down spiral, doing 3 times the work for only a third of the credit, as she watched as competitors like Nikki Bella, Carmella, Natalya, Alexa Bliss, and others would continue to begin their meteoric rise to the top, while Naomi never could seem to get a foothold. This, combined with injuries and other plagues, would lead Naomi to need to revamp herself and create a new persona. It would all come back full circle, as after months away from WWE, Naomi would return with newfound spirit and newfound confidence in her glow role in the 2018 Royal Rumble, debuting her new glow look, glow theme, and a brand new fro. Naomi would receive the loudest ovation of anyone in either of the Royal Rumbles outside of Edge that particular year. She would use this new stardom to become the first ever African American woman to compete in Saudi Arabia, as she would challenge Bayley, former friend and now champion, for the SmackDown Women's Championship. But could she be able to be trusted to be the first African American woman to win gold in Saudi Arabia? Of course not, as Bayley would ultimately retain in a match where it appeared Naomi had won earlier, but Bayley would end up cheating and retain. She then would be thrust into a storyline on SmackDown where then GM Sonya Deville, in what most people would even go as far as to say a racially developed storyline, would sit Naomi on the sidelines despite being a 2-time women's champion. Sonya would ultimately stop Naomi at constant turns, preventing her from being able to truly bring the glow to the WWE Universe. And Naomi would find herself on the wrong ends of multiple person attacks, before finally able to get that one-up over Sonya with the help of a former colleague and teammate, that of the boss, Sasha Banks. And at WrestleMania 38 in Dallas, in front of the same sold-out crowd that 6 years ago she had tapped out in the 10-woman tag match, Sasha and Naomi would go on to win gold, and she would capture her first tag team women's championship in her history, also making them the first ever African-American women's duo ever to win gold in WWE. Everything appeared to be on the upswing, especially with the stardom of Sasha Banks' glow leading Naomi to prevalence. However, it would be very short-lived. Despite holding tag team gold, Naomi and Sasha would both be put into singles storylines as they would compete for a six-pack challenge and an opportunity to challenge for the Raw Women's Championship, a match that we would find out months later that Naomi was scheduled to win. However, Sasha and Naomi had different points of view with the WWE management, primarily that of then President and CEO Vince McMahon. They believed that the Women's Tag Team Championship should be of higher priority, and when they couldn't reach an agreement, Sasha and Naomi would walk out of Monday Night Raw that night, forcing a change in the six-pack challenge and being pushed out of the business. Would they be vindicated, however, by the WWE Universe, its fans, and her former colleagues? That certainly would not be the case, as in a very cringe-worthy segment, Michael Cole, clearly getting fed lines from likely Vince McMahon backstage, would go on live television just hours after their walkout, stating lines such as, "They let us all down and have disappointed our millions of fans and the locker room." At a time in which Naomi and her colleague Sasha Banks should have been vindicated, they instead were thrown to the wolves, viewed as traitors to WWE, for only wanting to enhance the women and the locker room that she had fought so hard for her entire career without ever once turning. But she now watched as the very WWE Universe that she loved so much turned their back on her at the haste of Vince McMahon. Naomi, now known by her true first surname Trinity, would continue on her glow at other companies, primarily with TNA Impact, where she would acquire a 28-1 record over her career and very quickly move to the top of the division as she had always envisioned, winning the TNA Knockouts World Championship very quickly and rising up as one of the greatest champions in TNA Impact Women's history. But Naomi's viewpoint was always going to be that to be a star in WWE. And after dropping the TNA Knockouts Championship just a year after winning it, she would return to WWE with a newfound confidence. As at the Royal Rumble that year, sporting glow-in-the-dark clothes, the Glow would return once again to the loudest ovation that would be received at the Women's Royal Rumble that year up until number 28. As just under an hour after Naomi re-debuted in WWE, it would be the debut of Jade Cargill. No longer was anyone talking about Naomi, but everybody wanted to talk about the showdown potentially between Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair. Naomi's return just an hour after starting, already an afterthought to the WWE Universe. Bianca Belair would quickly become very fixated with the new acquirement to WWE, and it wasn't long before Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill would become one of the most popular teams in all of WWE. This, of course, would force Naomi's return to be very short-lived, as she would be put once again back in storylines to put over young talent such as NXT call-up Tiffany Stratton, resulting in Naomi ultimately falling to Tiffany Stratton inside the Elimination Chamber as Stratton's only pinfall on her way to now becoming the WWE Women's Champion, a championship that Naomi still has not seen since WrestleMania 33. Naomi's path to WrestleMania last year would seem almost impossible, but luckily for her, Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill would run into Damage Control, who were determined to run rampant and also continue to hold the Women's Tag Team Championships. And despite being outnumbered, Damage Control would continue to strive over Bianca and Jade and force them to need to look for additional assistance. When the moment came, Naomi was ready and seized the opportunity to be able to find her way to WrestleMania along her two African-American sisters. And at WrestleMania 40 in Philadelphia, now known as the Big Three, Naomi, Bianca Belair, and Jade Cargill would squash Damage Control and lead Naomi into her biggest win since WrestleMania 33 on the big stage. But anyone thinking Naomi would gain any significant push for this would be sadly mistaken, as the continuing budding friendship between Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair would lead them to tag team gold, while Naomi would once again be put on the sidelines, only appearing alongside Bianca and Jade at times in which they felt a third person was needed. That was until the fateful night, which circles us all back around to where we started, and Jade Cargill getting thrown through the car window. Naomi would ultimately come to Bianca Belair's side to ensure that the Women's Tag Team Championships would be properly defended, despite Naomi being coy about her being Jade Cargill's attacker. When evidence lined up that Naomi may not be the attacker, Bianca very quickly took on behind her friend, only to watch in horror inside of her chamber pod as Jade Cargill would attack Naomi and give her the comeuppance that she had earned from her attack. Naomi tearfully would admit a few days later that she was the attacker of Jade Cargill and ultimately run into the Storm's retribution, falling to a Jaded to end the rivalry and start their run to WrestleMania. So now you look at everything that has happened in Naomi's career, and we return back to where we were a few minutes ago. Bianca Belair now focused on winning the Women's World Championship, while Naomi once again stands alone, now against former colleague and teammate Jade Cargill. But when you now look at her entire career, every single person that she has trusted, look what happened with them. You go back to Cameron, turned on her. Sasha Banks, turned on her. Tamina, turned on her. Even short-term partners such as Carmella ultimately went against her. Then you look at Naomi, even if it wasn't because of teammates, she would fall victim to having to start completely over due to being consistently drafted between shows, never giving her an opportunity to be able to set any type of storyline or any type of foothold to control her destiny inside of the respective women's divisions. But most of all, Naomi did not feel vindicated for the decision that her and Sasha made years before, walking out of the company, and still always felt that chip on her shoulder for not being vindicated and appreciated by a majority of the WWE Universe and the WWE management. Naomi has since returned to WWE, but Sasha Banks, now known as Mercedes Moné, has never stepped foot back in WWE since that moment, thus leading to Naomi possibly having guilty feelings over costing Sasha her WWE career. And she watched helplessly also as her then friend Bianca Belair, instead of asking Naomi to be her partner, someone with far more experience and far more want to be there, would end up siding with the shiny new toy, that being Jade Cargill, and it finally would lead Naomi to her breaking point. You can also see the pain from an entire career from Naomi's perspective in some of the things she said to Bianca during that fateful SmackDown, such as, I don't give a damn about Jade because she doesn't give a damn about Bianca. I did it for you. I did it for us. B, come talk to me. I'm sorry. B, I did this for you. You just don't understand that right now. These are lines that, while ultimately Naomi is guilty and is facing down the fact that she is about to get shown as Jade's attacker, these are not things that you say to your friend if this was something done out of maliciousness. Naomi just finally got tired of being put on the back burner and finally reached her breaking point in terms of the frustration that she has felt for over a decade, really idealized by the final line she says, tearfully but angrily towards Bianca and the WWE Universe, stating, every time I start to clock in and stand up for myself, all of y'all turn on me. Naomi could finally release every bit of anger that she had. As you saw just in this video alone, 18 different moments where Naomi was forced to have to start completely back over from scratch, either because a former friend turned on her or she would be pushed back to the back of the locker room and forced to start over again. And even in her last moments before Jade Cargill would nail Jaded, as being hoisted up by Jade Cargill, she still would scream for her best friend, screaming Bianca, before getting nailed with Jaded, ending that fateful night on SmackDown and leading her into what is no doubt a forthcoming match with Jade Cargill at WrestleMania. So now, having a chance to be able to look at Naomi's career as a whole, it goes to show that I don't truly believe that Jade Cargill was ever a target, both personally or for any storyline reason. I don't think there's anything personal against Jade Cargill or against Bianca Belair. I think Jade Cargill was just the person that was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was collateral damage to a Naomi who is sick and tired of finally standing in the back, working 3 times as hard for only a third of the credit, and not getting the spotlight that she feels like she has worked so hard for, because every time she does, a new person comes in and is quickly thrust over her. So now, with all of this evidence that I have presented, what is your opinion? Was Naomi right to attack Jade Cargill? Obviously, I think we can all agree no, it wasn't. That's not the route that should have happened. But was she justified in attacking Jade Cargill and standing up for herself finally? I vehemently believe, yes, she was justified. And I have presented more than enough evidence to give you that contrarian view as to why that is. But what do you think? Throw your comments down below. And also let me know, what stories do you want me to tell? Because there's always a good story to tell. I'm just happy to show you the other side of it. This has been The Contrarian. I'm Steve with On the Ring Apron and Mania Club, proud members of the Champions of Hope Foundation. I'll catch you next time. Have a great one.